Good afternoon. Good afternoon. My name is Luis Alvarez, and I'm President and CEO of the Alvarez Technology Group, this place right behind me. For those of you that I know, welcome back. For those of you that I don't, welcome for the first time. And I'd like to give you a little bit of information about what Alvarez Technology Group does. We're a technology service provider and managed security services provider based in Salinas, California. We're on the Central Coast. Our clients are all over the country, so just because we're based here doesn't mean that I'm not seeing places from all over the place. And I'm welcoming you to our cybersecurity webinar. Originally, we had intended to focus strictly on cybersecurity, but the pandemic changed our viewpoint. So we're going to talk more broadly about lessons from the pandemic and some tips on business continuity, disaster planning, and cybersecurity. So let's get started. All right. So our agenda today, we're going to start by reviewing a little bit of what happened in 2019. What were the highlights in terms of cybercrime and some of the things that kept me awake at night and kept many of our clients awake at night. Also, we'll talk some about the outlook for 2020. What do we expect to be coming? What are the top issues that are impacting cybercrime this year? And then what is the effect of COVID-19? How did that change the equation, so to speak? We'll delve into that a little bit as well. We'll also talk about the NIST cybersecurity framework. This is the framework that we use to create our managed security services offering. NIST, it stands for the National Institute of Science and Technology, and they developed this framework to be a broad blueprint for companies to develop cybersecurity protection for themselves, and in our case, for our clients. And as a bonus, we're going to take a sneak peek at something that we just developed this month called ATG Thermal Protect. It's a real cool technology that I think is going to have a lot of application in the new way that we function after the pandemic. So before we get started, want to cover some buzzwords, right? Every industry has their buzzwords and their terminology, and we're no different. And when it comes to cybersecurity, sometimes we forget that we live and breathe this stuff every day, and our clients sometimes don't understand some of the terms that we talk about. So thanks to our friends at Axient, one of our cybersecurity vendors, they put together this glossary to help describe some of the things that we see out there in the wild. Some of the terms are more technical in nature, like flooding and advanced persistent threats. But some of them you're familiar with because you hear about them every day. Social engineering is a term that we use to describe the attempt by bad guys to try to get people to do things that they wouldn't otherwise do. And ransomware. I'm sure you've heard the term ransomware over and over and over again. And it really talks about how cyber criminals can infect a network using malware, malicious software. You can call it a virus if you want, but malware that can take your data, the important information that you have on your servers and workstations, and encrypt those in a way that you won't be able to recover from unless you have a good backup. You eventually get asked to pay a ransom, and sometimes you can't do it, and sometimes it doesn't work. So we'll talk more about that. The denial of service attack is something that we hadn't seen for a while, but is making a comeback, primarily because of so many people working from home now. The cyber criminals are targeting the offices that they're trying to get access to, understanding that most of us are connecting to our offices when we work from home via the internet. And if you can block access to firewall or interfere with traffic, then you can deny access. So we're seeing that pop up more this year than we anticipated. So let's talk about 2019. In terms of cybercrime, it was a bad year. Ransomware, as I mentioned earlier, is a problem that was growing, and last year it accounted for 18% of all incidents, up from 4% the year before. So a real significant increase. And the reason is obvious. Ransomware is a money-making opportunity for cyber criminals, and they made a lot of money last year, and they're going to continue to make money into this year, we think. Social engineering, mostly through phishing, spelled PH instead of an F, is a way to get people to do things that they wouldn't otherwise do by sending them emails or links to websites. And last year, it was a top method of compromise. It was used in 50% of the cases, so a significant increase over the year before. So it works, and just like ransomware, there's a lot of money to be made doing that. The number one target were corporate environments, and it really doesn't surprise me because a lot of the other targets are much better protected. Government agencies, for example, Department of Defense sites, those sorts of things have very active, very significantly strong cybersecurity protections. So corporate environments are an easier target, I should say. But they also targeted e-commerce quite a bit, and we're talking about things like Amazon and eBay, those sorts of those on-site or online sites that were not well protected. And cloud services, things like Office 365, now, by the way, known as Microsoft 365, as well as some sites like Salesforce and others that have become critical to our ability to conduct business. So the cyber criminals know that those are important assets that we use in our day-to-day operation, and they targeted those as actively as they targeted anything else. Retail, in terms of industry, was the most targeted this past year. And the reason is that retail and retailers have a wealth of information on customers, not just credit card information, but demographic information, all sorts of data that can be used to steal identities. So they're heavily targeted by cyber criminals, and they're also some of the least protected places that we see. There's not a lot of protections in place, and most retailers don't take the threat as seriously as they should. And even large retailers, we saw compromises with Macy's last year. We saw compromises in a number of retailers, as well as in the hospitality industry, one of the targets that is mentioned there. How many of you were victims of the Marriott breach or the Hyatt breach? Many of us got letters saying that our information was stolen and that they're sorry that it happened, but those targets will continue to be hit because they are, like I said, a wealth of information about people, not just about credit cards. In terms of geography, the most exploits were in the Asia Pacific region, which doesn't surprise me because when you think of state actors, that is the state-sponsored version of cybercrime, China and North Korea, Vietnam are three of the top countries that have governments that are actively involved in exploiting other countries, in particular the United States. And you can see that we're not far behind. And North America, the United States, and Canada in particular are targeted very actively across the globe, not just from the Asia Pacific, but from Europe, Eastern Europe in particular, because there's a lot of opportunity here. And unfortunately, our cybersecurity isn't the best in terms of how our industries respond to the threats. And then in the Middle East, they were targeted largely because of the oil industry, either the oil companies themselves or the countries, the governments that have a lot of oil development going on. Again, it's a way to get data. It's a way to get access, and it's a way to disrupt commerce. So all told, the estimates are that last year the cost of cybercrime was over $11 trillion. Yeah, trillion with a T. It's a huge problem, and it's only getting worse. Last year, we saw the beginnings of a new trend, one that worries us in particular because we are a service provider. Cyber criminals started to recognize that those of us that provide services to a number of clients have access to those clients in ways that they don't. And by targeting us, if our protections and our cybersecurity efforts aren't robust enough that they can get to our clients through us. This is an example of something that happened just last week. Cognizant, which is one of the largest managed services providers in the world, I think worth close to $100 billion. They were compromised, and by that compromise, they will also compromise their clients. So that was a significant issue that they're still dealing with today, and will probably be dealing with for many months to come. But it's not just large providers that are targeted. In Texas last year, there was a small managed services provider who provided services to dozens of small towns in West Texas. And they were compromised, they were breached. And through that breach, the cyber criminals were able to spread ransomware across dozens of towns that they managed, and were able to also corrupt the backups so that these towns had no choice but to pay the ransom to try to get their data back. And so that was done by accessing an MSP that really hadn't taken the precautions that they needed to and set up the protections that they should have. And there was another managed service provider that was hit. They provided backup services to dental offices across the country, and through that compromise, the cyber criminals were able to get access to many of those dental offices, and again, spread ransomware, force these companies to pay the ransom in order to get their data back. And in their case, when you talk about healthcare in particular, there's a number of regulatory requirements that they maintain data and that they securely protect that data. And if they don't, they're subject to fines and even criminal sanctions. So it's a serious problem that is still being dealt with. But it was something that had not been done before, this exploitation of service providers. And it's something that we think is going to continue even more into this year because of what's going on with the COVID-19 pandemic. So what do we expect in 2020? Well, we expect more of the same, but much worse. We think that the number of ransomware attacks will continue to grow, and they'll change. There's a concern that cyber criminals now not only are trying to encrypt data, but they are attempting to exploit that data in advance. So the new ransomware model that we're seeing is cyber criminals get access to important data, then they take some of that data out of the network. So they remove the data, which is unusual, and then they encrypt the rest of it. And so then they, ask for a ransom to be paid to decrypt the data. They get paid by that. Then afterwards, they inform the victim of the ransomware that they have confidential and sometimes embarrassing data that they were able to take from the network. Sometimes it's financial information, sometimes it's other information, and that they will publish that information publicly unless they pay another ransom. And if you think that this is just something theoretical, this just happened to the city of Torrance recently. They were hit by ransomware and were told that they had been that the criminals had been able to extract confidential and extremely damning information about the public, the citizens, things that could be considered significantly confidential, and that they would publish that information if they didn't pay another ransom on top of the ransom for the encryption with ransomware. So their tactics are evolving, and they're starting to be bolder and not really care that there's a lot that that they're going to be confronted by law enforcement. In fact, unfortunately, for anybody that's been hit by ransomware, the reality is that law enforcement at the local, state, and federal level really don't treat it as the type of crime it should be treated as. It's just too difficult. The criminals are typically overseas, hard to get to. Sometimes they're in countries that support their actions and their activities, so they don't get support from the governments there. So they just treat it as geez, we're sorry it happened to you, but we don't have time to deal with it. So if you ever get hit by ransomware, you don't expect a lot of help from the authorities. Another thing that we're seeing this year, and it's only being exacerbated by what's going on around the pandemic crisis, is something called CEO fraud, or also known as business email compromise. But CEO fraud is a much sexier name, so that's the one we use nowadays. And it's a more elaborate way of social engineering. So I want to take a moment to describe it to you, to kind of show you the pattern and show you the impact it has. So, like I said, it's a form of social engineering, trying to get somebody to do something that they wouldn't otherwise do. And what happens is that cyber criminals will target an organization and learn as much as they can about it. So this is a very targeted crime. It's not something like sending out a bunch of phishing emails and hoping that somebody clicks a link. This is the kind of crime where the bad guys will go on your website, they'll go on your LinkedIn page, they'll go on Facebook, they'll go anywhere online that they can find information about you to see what kind of organization you are, who the players are, who are the senior executives or CEO, and unfortunately for most of us that have information on our website, when you go to the About page, it'll list all the information they need, including email addresses and phone numbers and things like that. So they'll get access to that CEO's email address and then target a subordinate within that organization, also information that they glean through online research. So they may find out who the controller is, or who the accounts payable clerk is, or who the person that orders the products is. And they'll send that person emails pretending to be from the CEO or from that senior executive. And the initial emails are very benign. They're not anything that would raise suspicions for most people, and they're not asking for anybody to do anything. They might be saying like, hello, how was your day? Things like that. What they're looking for is for that person to engage. So once that person responds and starts to engage, the chase is afoot, as they say. This is now, they know that they can reel this person in, and then get them to do something that they might not otherwise do, because they've been getting these emails from their boss or their boss's subordinate. But then there comes a point in time when they will ask that person to do something that's within their purview. So for example, if it was the controller, they might say, hey, I'm trying to close this deal. Can you wire $50,000 to this account? And the controller will do it. And we've seen numerous instances of this happening. And it doesn't just happen to small companies. There's an aerospace company in France that got hit by this, where they wired millions of dollars into an account because the cyber criminals had been targeting this particular company for a few months and knew that there was a real deal happening, and took advantage of the CEO's absence when he was on a plane to execute their plan. And it cost the CFO, who was the one that authorized the payments, to be fired, as well as the CEO, because the board decided that they had not done sufficient training to prepare their team for the eventuality of this happening. So, why do they do it? Well, the FBI reported that last year there was over 166,000 reported incidents, costing over $26 billion. So this is a big money maker. And I emphasize the word reported because one of the things that we've learned is that a lot of companies who get hit by CEO fraud, especially if the amount is not that big, prefer to keep it wrapped up and not report the problem, since they don't want to be they don't want to let their customers and their vendors and maybe their partners know that they had a security lapse. So we suspect that this number is woefully underreported and that there's significantly more CEO fraud going on than we know about. Last thing that we're concerned about this year is, as some of you know, at the beginning of this year, Microsoft stopped supporting Windows 7 and Server 2008 in terms of providing security updates and patches to vulnerabilities. But despite that, there's still 21% of all the PCs online today are still running Windows 7. And most of those, we suspect, are home users. Businesses have done a pretty good job of upgrading to Windows 10 over the course of the last few years, and in particular last year. We worked with many of our clients to get them to move on to Windows 10 starting early last year, so they wouldn't be surprised that this deadline hit in January, and we did a pretty good job of that. But the reality is most home users are happy with their setup, even if they're running Windows 7. And that presents some problems now, especially with the work from home environment that we find ourselves in. Server 2008 is still in many production environments, still vulnerable and still being used in places where it shouldn't be. And what concerns us is, even though Microsoft over the years has been patching these systems, the reality is that, like I said, it stopped doing it January 14th of this year. But the reality is cyber criminals are exploiting known and new vulnerabilities. That is, there was a lot of vulnerabilities that we suspect were in Windows 7 in particular that never got patched, but they were never exploited because the bad guys were waiting for this point in time. They were waiting for the day when Microsoft stopped caring. And then that means that now they didn't have to worry about a patch being developed for something that they knew was vulnerable. And so we are concerned that there's a lot of exploitation that will happen this year in the Windows 7 realm in particular. So we're encouraging all of our clients, and I'm encouraging all of you, if you still have Windows 7 systems running or Server 2008, please upgrade them to the latest and greatest that you can. Because you're going to be targeted if they can detect that you're running Windows 7. So let's talk about the new abnormal, work from home. I don't know if any of us 2 months ago would have ever used terms like work from home or social distancing, but now they are things that we do on a real basis. And most of us are working from home, but so are the cyber criminals. There was a segment on 60 Minutes last year, and I don't remember the date, but if you Google it, I'm sure it'll pop up. It's probably on YouTube someplace. But it showed, it was a segment on cyber criminals in Eastern Europe. And I forget the country that it was in, but they followed this guy who was a normal dude, wearing normal clothes, living in a normal apartment with wife and kids like we all do. And he was going to work and he was carrying his lunch pail and his briefcase. And he shows up in this office and says hi, and he sits down and he starts working. And he was one of those guys that was out there trying to infect systems with ransomware. That was their business. They were cyber criminals, and they worked in an office building just like the rest of us. And they worked with comrades and colleagues, and they joked around the water cooler and had lunch and did all the things that an office worker would normally do. But they were in a country that didn't want to enforce laws against cybercrime because they were making that particular country was making a lot of money. These guys now may be working from home, but they're still cyber criminals because there's a lot of money to be made, and they're not going to stop just because we're working from home. We also feel that working from home is not going to go away anytime soon, if ever. In fact, we see it as an inflection point. Up until now, a lot of businesses were reluctant to let their employees work from home. Most of them felt that they wouldn't be very productive, that they would probably hang out in their pajamas all day. They do the laundry, they go garden, they take time to watch TV rather than work. And the reality is, yeah, all those things really happen. We wear pajamas at home all the time, and we do our laundry during the day. But we're now more productive than ever in most cases. Our employees are working harder from home than they ever did work from home or from the office. And there's a number of reasons. First and foremost, the work doesn't have a definitive start or stop anymore. That is, people, if you're anything like me, I mean, I roll in front of my computer before 7 a.m. and I may be there for hours at a time before I take a break in getting work done, doing things, which means, that I'm being much more productive than if I had to, get dressed, get in the car, drive to work, get to my desk, set up my computer, all those things that were part of normal life before March now have changed. So we're working from home more. And I think after this pandemic crisis is over, businesses are going to be much more open to the idea of letting their employees work from home because they're finding it to be a good solution. And in fact, I've read that there's some concern in the commercial office space environment that maybe a lot of people that had offices before might consider basically letting their leases lapse and letting their employees continue to work from home. We'll see. Cyber criminals are very actively targeting work from home employees. They just, like I said earlier, they do their research. They're not, this isn't the fly-by-night operation or a lone wolf that's out there trying to get lucky with a ransomware deployment where you get some Bitcoin paid to him. This is a very sophisticated operation, and they know that the work from home environment presents to them a unique opportunity to target workers who might otherwise be more vigilant if they're in the office. That office setting, if nothing else, makes you more aware that you're working as opposed to sitting in your computer at home. And so you might slip up. You might not be as careful as you would be otherwise. So the cyber criminals are trying to take advantage of that. One new tactic that we have seen actually take place is they're sending a package or packages with USB drives to homes. The packages arrive. They're told, hey, this is from your office. Make sure to plug this USB key in right away because there's some important information there. People always like getting presents, right? For whatever reason, so they think this is a present. They click in that, put that USB drive in there, and all of a sudden, their PC gets infected, and that PC is connected via the internet to their office where all their important data is, and that virus flies through that connection right to the servers at the office. And so that vulnerability of sending stuff to an environment, a work from home environment, where there might not be the security awareness that there needs to be, is a significant concern to us, and one that we're trying to address with our clients. Each work from home worker represents a vector into your business. And by that, it means another way to get to your office. When everybody's sitting at the office and you have one internet connection with one firewall on there, that means that can be heavily protected. But if now you have all of these workers that are working remotely, that represents a lot of opportunity, a target-rich opportunity to exploit weaknesses in the system and try to get access to information, to data. And cyber criminals are not in a hurry, not particularly. Most breaches last year, the average breach was in existence for upwards of 6 months before the cyber criminals took action. That is, they had infiltrated that network and were watching what was going on for upwards of 6 months before they decided to do anything with the access that they had. And it's not just me saying this. The FBI has already said that they're seeing a spike in cybercrime during the coronavirus pandemic, and they're concerned, very concerned, that businesses are not taking the same level of precautions that they would normally take because of this pandemic. So they're warning people to take a breath and get back on the program of making sure that you're safe. And so what we've done is we've worked with our clients to develop a series of best practices for the work from home situation that we want to share with you. Ideally, we feel that users working from home should have company provided systems, either a system that they are using, a laptop perhaps, to connect up to their desktop in the office. But worst case, if they can take that desktop, the one that they normally use in the office, home to work from, that would be better than having them use their own home PC or their kids' gaming PC that is loaded with Lord knows what in terms of software. Those are specifically vulnerable systems. So ideally, if you're going to have your workers work from home, provide them the systems that they're going to be using. And make sure you treat those systems the same way that you would treat them if they were in your building. Make sure you install the same security tools and services that you use at the office. If you have a service agreement with somebody like us that manages your systems, make sure that service agreement extends to the systems that the home users are using to access the network. It's vital that they get protected just like every other system on the network. If you're going to allow remote access, then make sure that you use virtual private network, VPNs, to get access, and not just open access to a server somewhere in the office. And where possible, use multi-factor authentication. Multi-factor authentication, for those of you that don't know, is a secondary form of authentication. For Gmail, for example, recently implemented this. So if you log into your Gmail account, you'll get a text that asks you to put in a code or respond in the affirmative that you're really logging in. And that second form of authentication makes it a multi-factor authentication system. If you're using cloud-based services, whether it's Office 365, Salesforce, QuickBooks Online, make sure that you enable multi-factor authentication. All of those services have multi-factor authentication available, because if you're just using a user ID and password, you're creating an opportunity for somebody to get into those systems much easier than if you use multi-factor authentication. We want to make sure that our employees, when they're working from home, have a secure workplace at home. That is, they're not sitting there setting up their systems in, on a kitchen table, in an open area that somebody else can walk by and sit down and use the computer. It should be protected physically as well as with software and cyber protection on the PC itself. Make sure that the Wi-Fi access that your employees are using at home is set up securely. Most people are good about setting up a passphrase or password to make sure that only they can get into the system, but some people don't. Some people have an open Wi-Fi system, which means that anybody can connect up to their Wi-Fi and use their internet. We don't think that's a smart way of doing things. In fact, it's a huge security problem. So if possible, make sure that your employees are using Wi-Fi with a secure passphrase and password that's complex, not just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If possible, and this is hard, but it definitely is desirable to segregate the home and work network. On our home networks, if you're like me, you have dozens of devices, PC or smart TVs, your Nest your Amazon Fire Stick, all these devices that are connected to your Wi-Fi. And some of them present vulnerabilities because these are devices that may have compromised firmware, software that can be exploited by the bad guys. Most people don't use firewalls at home. They just rely on whatever their broadband provider or ISP gives them. And usually those devices are not the most secure in the world. So if possible, you can segregate the home and work network. And if you're in a regulated industry like financial services or healthcare, it's a requirement. It's a violation to not protect those networks. And most importantly, provide ongoing cybersecurity awareness training. That could be anything from the kind of training that we provide our clients, which is on demand and it has a number of modules that can be completed to certify that they've done it every year, or just sending information out to them about staying aware, staying vigilant, so that they don't drop their guard, because that's what the cyber criminals are hoping for. And most importantly, develop policies and procedures for how you implement a work from home environment. Make sure that it's documented and make sure your employees know what that looks like and that you get their signature on that document so that they understand what your expectations of them are. And just by way of example, how easy it is to get some of these tools that the cyber criminals use. This is a website that actually advertises for these tools that people can use to hack into systems. And as you can see, they're not very expensive. And so cyber criminals are, it's a really easy industry to get involved in. The barrier to entry is pretty low. It's not a very expensive undertaking. And there's lots of resources out there that can help you get started. So if you think the cyber criminals aren't using these resources, you're badly mistaken. So how do you protect yourself? What framework can you use? Well, we think that there are a number of good frameworks out there. And frameworks really are blueprints. They're things that help you put together the best cybersecurity environment for yourself and your business. The NIST framework is one that was developed and we think is actually the most robust and the most flexible. And it really has these elements of identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. And I want to start with recover because a lot of times when we talk to people about cybersecurity, there's this unrealistic expectation that we can make them invulnerable, that somehow by deploying the right combination of software and services and monitoring tools that we're able to protect them, and so that they don't need to worry so much about recovery. Well, as you can see, the framework as it is assumes that somebody's going to get in. It assumes that something bad's going to happen and that you have an obligation and responsibility to develop a methodology for recovering from that exploit, that breach, that disaster that occurs. So when we work with our clients, we look at each one of these elements of the framework, and we develop processes, procedures, services, tools to address each one. One example that we try to use, because it's a simple analogy to use, is the protections that you have in your house. Most of us have homes where we lock our windows and we lock our doors when we leave. And most of us use an alarm system because we recognize that just having a locked door or a locked window doesn't keep criminals out. That just gives them something that they have to break in order to get into your house. And without that alarm, you don't know if you have any sort of burglary going on. And that's where detect, which is the third element of this framework, comes in. And so we spend a lot of time with our clients developing detection systems because we want to know if something does happen, despite all the protections that we put at the front end, whether it's a firewall, endpoint protection, antivirus, all those things that are important to have as part of the protect phase of this. Detection is just as important. And having a plan in place to be able to execute on something as soon as you detect it is critical. And so we work on that as well. We work on creating disaster recovery plans for our clients because we think it's important for them to have a plan in place. For example, this pandemic has represented a real challenge for a lot of people. And even the best laid plans that we had put together didn't assume a shelter in place situation. I don't think anybody did, especially for the number of weeks that we're into this now. And that's one of those unforeseen circumstances that you just cannot plan for. However, if you have a plan, you can adapt, and you can be nimble and use elements of your existing plan, because you've taken into account all the possible things that could impact your business, and you developed ways to overcome those challenges. So one of those systems that you put in place will help you overcome even the most unforeseen of challenges. A lot of times when we talk to clients about their cybersecurity, they like to point out that they have cybersecurity insurance, which is great. We love cybersecurity insurance, and we recommend it to all of our clients. We work with them to make sure that they can get it, and they get the right kind of cyber insurance, because not all cyber insurance is created equally. Each company has its own kind of nuance in terms of what they'll cover and what they won't cover. And in many cases, the coverages have limitations. So we work very closely with our clients to look at those limitations to make sure it fits their business. If you're a large manufacturer that's doing $100 million worth of business, and you have a cyber insurance policy that has a claim limit of $100,000, that may not be enough. Because the cyber, if you get hit with ransomware, they're going to ask for millions of dollars, not thousands of dollars. Cyber insurance companies have also gotten really good about being very proactive with helping their clients or customers prepare and institute processes, procedures, and programs to protect themselves. And we're seeing a trend more so in the last 90 days or so, where cyber insurance companies are actually getting very particular about making sure that you're doing all the things you need to do to protect yourself. One of the things that we always tell people about cyber insurance that they need to understand is cyber insurance is something that pays the claim after the fact. So think about this. You get hit by ransomware. You have a policy that covers that. The cyber criminals want $50,000. You want to pay it. You don't have $50,000. Your policy says that they'll cover that, but you have to first pay it, then file a claim, and wait until they adjudicate it and pay you. So if you don't have the wherewithal up front, cyber insurance isn't going to do a whole lot for you. Also, cyber insurance limits the kind of things you can file claims for. So, for example, if cyber criminals break into your network and encrypt all of your data on your PCs and get you to the point where now you have to essentially recreate your network, and you decide, well, rather than doing that, I'm just going to buy new PCs, they're not going to pay for that. If you want to improve your environment and improve your systems, that's on you. They're just going to pay for the recovery efforts to get the old PCs back up and running. So it's a very nuanced world, and there's no guarantees. We've seen a lot of claims get denied by cyber insurance companies after the fact, because they discover that the companies that they had extended coverage to weren't doing all the things that they could have been doing to protect themselves. So they do a lot of forensic analysis now before they even get to the point of paying a claim. So be aware that cyber insurance is not a panacea. It doesn't solve everything. It's an element of your cyber security, but it's not the ultimate element of your cyber security. So with that, I'd like to move on to ATG Thermal Protect. And let me talk a little bit about how we got here. As I said earlier, we see a lot of the changes that have happened over the course of the last few weeks, last couple months, as permanent changes. Things like social distancing isn't going to go away anytime soon. Things like screening people for high temperature, for fevers, isn't going to go away anytime soon. Some of the other behaviors that we've all got accustomed to, work from home isn't going to go away anytime soon. So we started thinking a few weeks ago about what we could do when eventually the economy opened up, when the shelter-in-place orders were lifted and people could get back to work. How can we help our clients get open faster? And we recognized that there was some significant things that they needed to change about their business that would instill a sense of safety and security to their customers and their employees, and as well as build confidence with their customers and employees. And one of those areas was thermal screening. And this was part of our Get Back to Work initiative. There's a number of other products and services that we're going to unveil over the course of the next few weeks, but this was the first big one. And what we saw was that this right now screening for temperature, for fever, is a very manual process. If any of you have been to stores that do it, they hold up a infrared thermometer to a couple of inches from your forehead. It's very invasive. It feels weird, quite frankly. And like my wife said, if she ever goes to a restaurant, somebody holds up a thermometer to her forehead, she's not going back to that restaurant ever again. And a lot of people feel that way. They just don't want their private space invaded that way. But we do need to get our restaurants open. We do need to get our offices open again. We do need to get all of these the things that we used to do done, but we also need to come up with ways to provide that level of protection. And so Thermal Protect is an idea of creating a highly efficient temperature screening system that's non-invasive, non-contact, it's manageable, it's traceable. It gives us the ability to do it at scale, right? So you can have a lot of people being screened at the same time, and it's not just this one-to-one process. So it uses thermal cameras to detect temperature. It can be done in a static way or mobile way. We're still developing some of the technology around it, but we're excited. We're really looking forward to getting this out there. We're already talking to a number of people in various industry. Agriculture and education are two that have really stepped up and wanted to learn more about this, and we're gonna do a webinar around this in the next couple of weeks. If you're interested in attending that, you can either wait for the notification or send us an email at info@alvareztg.com, and we'll be happy to put you on the list. But we think it's going to be a game changer for a lot of industries and build a lot of confidence in people when they get back out there and start going to stores and malls and places where they've been avoiding for the time being. That said, however, I'd be remiss if I didn't put out the disclaimer that this is a screening tool. This is not a medical device. It's not designed or intended to diagnose or prevent treatment of a disease or a condition. It's really just a screening tool to do initial screenings and then move on to, if we identify people that maybe may have a fever, you can then do, a secondary screening to determine if they need help or they should be going home or going to the doctor. But we think this is going to be a key component in getting our community back to work, getting our schools open, and getting our businesses to be safe and secure places for our customers and our employees. So with that, I want to see if we have any questions that need to be answered. So if you don't see any questions, again, if you want to learn more about Thermal Protect, feel free to email us. If you want any more information about anything that we talked about today, happy to sit down with you and talk about how we can help you with your cybersecurity initiatives. I want to thank you for attending. A link to this video will be available soon. We'll post it and send out notification to all of those that attended. And for those that didn't attend, we'll send them the link as well. So thank you. Have a great day, and we'll talk soon.